tens of thousands of LAPD applicants. And Louisiana actually declared their first cyber security emergency when they had school districts that were impacted by it. And to finish up, you had a bunch of cities in Florida. So what does this tell you? If you're an IT professional, you probably should not move to Florida. You had Tallahassee. They stole almost $500,000 from a payroll system. And please note that it wasn't necessarily them directly. They had a payroll service vendor. They were the weak link. So what they do is this all started, we started hearing about the promotion of all this with the big Target one. If you remember many years ago, the Target hack received a ton of press. It wasn't Target specifically, it was a vendor they used. So if you think about it, that's their weak link. So you are responsible for your vendors. You're responsible for people you work with. So that could be your weak link, and that's still a problem. So even though the city of Tallahassee didn't necessarily get hacked, their vendor did, and that impacted payroll services for them. It was a third party. So what the hackers do, if they're good at their illegal jobs, unfortunately, is they will find where that back door is, where that weak link is. And very often you can have, your security can be a 9 and your vendor can have a security level at a 3. They're going to go for that vendor. Also happened to an airport, which is pretty scary stuff to think that there was an attack there. And I included this last one, Augusta, Maine, because it's one of my favorite quotes. The ID director said that it was caused by a vindictive piece of malware with a bad attitude. Their entire network was frozen. They had to rebuild it from scratch. Thankfully, they had backup files, but these are the kind of problems that you see. Finally, one I think that got just about the most press was the city of Baltimore. They asked for, and by the way, the ransoms are often in Bitcoin. They want them, they want a cyber ransom, and they asked for $76,000. The city apparently didn't seem to have a tested disaster recovery plan, amazingly. They didn't pay, understandably, and so they had to rebuild all their digital systems. So you're talking about a city being taken offline for 3 weeks, which is amazing. And so that affected all their citizens, taxes and water and property, and they estimated the loss at $18 million. And again, they also didn't have cyber insurance to cover those costs. We'll talk a little bit about that later if you have questions. Used to be, by the way, 10 years ago, people were thinking, what cyber insurance do I possibly need that? Now it's become much more common, something to look at for businesses, small, medium, large businesses. And again, I brought this out for a reason, that city of Allentown, again, shut down the computers for weeks. There wasn't even a ransom made, apparently. But what happened? One city employee brought his laptop with him while traveling, and he didn't get proper software updates that probably would have blocked the malware. So again, think about this. You can have 5 employees, you can have 10 employees. All it takes is 1 employee and 1 laptop. He opened a phishing email, came back to the office, and spread it to the entire office. And suddenly, the city, it cost them about $1 million. So think about it. 1 employee who didn't get updates on their laptop cost the city approximately $1 million. And now they have heightened costs of over $400,000 annually for their cyber defense. So again, why are we here? We're talking about the business community. And I start with this, which surprises people when we talk about the businesses, is that physical theft and loss are still a big issue. I know that a lot of people don't have their employees, or maybe you aren't working directly at the office anymore, but victims' work areas have been a huge problem in terms of cyber problems. People leaving paper documents all around. People have their computer, their password protected, and they have a little sticky note that has the password right there on the computer. That doesn't really help you very much to do that. You have staff on vehicles. There have been many cases where people have been traveling on business. I know it's not happening as much lately. They left a laptop there. They left a tablet in a cab. This happened with a major tax filer in Long Island. They had one person who had a laptop that I believe they left in a cab, and they had I think it was well over 100,000 tax return pieces of information that were suddenly hacked and hackable because of that. So again, any device you have that has a lot of data has to be given a higher level of protection. And I want to bring up the fact that right now, if you look at it, you can have a small business, say you have 5 employees. You say, well, I'm not likely to be impacted by this, but say all 5 of those employees are working remotely and they're each accessing data through their phones and through their laptops. So right off the bat, each of them, that's one person who has 2. So that's 10 points of entry into your information. And right off the bat, all it takes is one of them having one laptop or one phone that doesn't have proper antivirus, anti-malware, that isn't protected. It opens up a phishing email, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, and suddenly you have a problem. Was there a question? No? Okay. So again, you want to make sure that you're looking at all the points of entry to your business and how people can access your information and how your employees are accessing your information, because it's all changed now. And I don't think we're going to go back to the way it was for quite a while if we do. And even before then, you have a large percentage of our workforce that do their emailing by phone, that check that check on office information through their tablets and through their laptops. Ask yourself, do these devices have a high level of protection? Are these all password protected? Do they have updated firewalls on them? The answer in many cases is probably no, unfortunately. So again, physical theft is still a big deal and still impacts people. But one of the biggest things that we're going to talk about today is malware, malicious software. I'm pretty sure you're all very familiar with the term, even though not everyone knows all the specifics about it. But this is what really does cause the majority of the problems. All of your operational records can be impacted. Your vendors, employees, people who pay online. If you have a website that accepts payment through the website. And again, often this is through stolen credentials that they'll get and whatever other system data you have. An insidious form of this is ransomware, which is where they encrypt the entire hard drive of your computer, of your whole system. They can lock down an entire business. This has actually driven some small businesses right out of business. They'll hold you for ransom. What it says, it's a ransom. They will. You'll get a horrible note that says if you don't pay such and such fee, usually in Bitcoin, in some kind of a cryptocurrency, by a certain period of time, usually it's, could be 48, 96 hours, short period of time, and it will be permanently encrypted, which means you'll never get this information again, unfortunately. And a lot of small businesses are really not set up for this. Again, there have been towns and school districts that have actually paid these ransoms, as scary as that sounds. And there are also web app attacks, web application attacks. And one of the issues with that is when you have an application that you use for your business or through your website, very often it's not going to be protected by your firewall, because the whole point of it is that it's open to the public. It's open to all users. So it's not going to be blocking certain traffic. A good firewall is basically, it really is what it says. It's a wall between untrusted traffic and trusted traffic, depending on how it's formulated or configured. So the problem you're going to have is that you're leaving this open basically to everyone to use your app. And so the firewall is not going to really stop things. And what often happens is you have login, password information that is compromised, and they can use that, use your legitimate credentials to access all of your information. They are posing as authorized officials, authorized staff. And very often you have problems with social engineering. Phishing is one of the main ways you acquire credentials. And again, if you have to pick the number one problem, it's phishing. The number one thing to train your employees and yourself, it's spotting phishing emails that look so much better these days. It used to be fairly easy. They looked very unprofessional, tons of spelling errors. They looked obviously phony. Now they unfortunately look sleek and professional and realistic, and they have often they've used logos that make them look official. Even from within organizations, it looks as though it's coming from one of your fellow staff members, but it's actually not. And one of the ways you can protect against this, by the way, in terms of things like web app attacks, is using something called two-factor authentication, or it's known as 2FA. And that's basically, it involves two things to verify that someone is who they say they are. It's something you have. It could be like a fob or a phone. It's something like a password. And it's something you are, like things like voice recognition or fingerprint fingerprint, or even some places, if they're doing a higher level, it could be your eye print and eye scan. But it's got to be two of those three. And the most common ones you'll see are things like phones or fobs or an ATM card and having a password. So when you're dealing with an organization now and they ask you to, and you're trying to log in and they say, we're going to send you a quick code, it's going to go to your phone and you're going to input that code, it seems like a pain. But it's a good thing. It's giving you a higher level of protection. They have a higher level of protection. That's what you want. It's the gold standard. Everyone should be using it. Even small businesses should be using two-factor authentication. It shouldn't just be a password. It should be something in addition to that. And again, passwords these days are sometimes really easily guessed. So just keep that in mind. Another problem, and people don't like to talk about this or hear about it, it could be insider misuse. It could be problems within your own organization, within your own employees. It could be one rogue employee or someone who just isn't very good at their job or isn't very well trained, even if they don't have a malicious intent. Um, where it's really abusive is where you have people who actually do have malicious intent and they're trying to steal data. This has often happened in some of the larger organizations. It takes one rogue employee who is actually selling this data, stealing this data. And other times it's simply these workarounds. You know, people sharing passwords is an unapproved workaround. You shouldn't have 5 staff members all using the same password. That negates the whole point of having passwords. So if you see people doing things for convenience that are actually bypassing things you built into your system, that's a problem. So you want to have conversations, you want to have staff meetings. I don't care if it's 3 people or 10 people. Have these regular conversations. Find out how people are logging in. Are they logging off? Are they leaving their computers on? If you're in the office, I know, again, a lot of people are remote, but if you're in the office, are they leaving things out on their desk when they're going to lunch? Are they leaving themselves still logged in when they're leaving their desk area? If they have a cleaning crew come in, are pieces of private information, or PII, which is personally identifiable information, is that right there on your desktop without knowing it? So these are problems. And again, at some point, I think a lot of people may be going back to work. So these are things to focus on when people are back in the office. But you see this all the time with people leaving their workspace completely open to the general public. If people are walking around, if it's after hours, again, if it's even a cleaning crew or people are doing work in the building, you have to pay attention to these things. And it has to you have to retrain your brain to put security first in these areas. Because I think for the most part, we have a very casual attitude about these things. Not everyone, but a lot of businesses do. And again, human error, like things like, when you're sending emails out and where it automatically populates the email address, but it's someone else's email address. And you find out afterward you sent it to the wrong recipient, accidentally publishing data to your public web servers that should have been private. These are little things, disposing things in a way that you shouldn't. There was a huge problem years ago. It was one of the major pharmacies. They had thrown out thousands, I think hundreds of thousands of pieces of documents for all of their customers regarding this is their medical information, this is their payment information, this involved prescription information. It was all just, none of it was shredded. It was just out in dumpsters behind the office there, behind the building there. I believe the FTC didn't like that very much, and I think that they were obviously fined heavily for that, but they also, I believe, had to be monitored for about 20 years by the FTC at that point. It was a serious case. So that was one of the large scale ones, but it happens on a smaller scale all the time with people just dealing with human error and lack of training. Is that someone? Okay. One of the things I can tell you that's going to help you so much in this area is just scaling down. I think a lot of businesses don't realize you're holding on for information you don't need. You don't need to collect it in the first place, or if you do, maybe it's a one-time use. Why are you holding on to it? So think about, look at what you have. And again, take a long look at your system. I'm going to guess that if you look at everything that you've been retaining over the years, you'll be really surprised. You're not just paper records, although look at old file cabinets. You could have 20 years of paper records and people's credit card information from payments. You could be holding on to information in your database that's 5, 8, 10 years old. You could have thousands of bits of PII for your consumers, tons of credit card information, banking information. Do you know what you have, and do you know what you're retaining? And you don't want to find out after you've been hacked or if you've been compromised. If you don't even realize what's been hacked and what's been lost, how are you going to tell your customers, what the problem was and what's been exposed to the general public or to hackers? So again, think about this. You have a legal requirement for it. You have a real legitimate business need to hold on to it. If you don't ever collect it. Way back when, people were asking for people's social security numbers to identify them. Thankfully, that has mostly stopped. Insurance companies used to rely upon that just as your identifying factor, which is crazy, but they were. So if you don't need to ask for this information from your consumers, don't ask for it. And if you don't need to retain it, do not retain it. If they're going to your website and they're making a purchase with the credit card information, if it's not some recurring charge and you don't need to hold on to it, don't hold on to that credit card information. It's one more piece where you're subject to a potential loss of information, loss of data, to a hack, for your potential legal responsibility for that. So again, think about what you have and what you don't need to be holding on to. And again, if you have to hold on to it for a certain number of years, there's a specific requirement. Well, then if it has to be a year or 2 years, as soon as that is done, then you purge it from your system. You don't hold on to it as longer than you have to. But I encourage all of you, look at all of your databases, your computers, your hard drives. If you're keeping this on thumb drives, whatever, you have stuff at home you're keeping as well, at file cabinets, what are you retaining and what shouldn't you be? You may find out that you have a lot of information that you simply have been holding on to that you shouldn't be after some cases 10, 15, 20 years. You'll be surprised. And I think I know everyone should have a written records retention policy. Ask yourself if you do. What do you need to comply with the law, your business? Keep that policy updated. And again, what do you have to retain? How do you have to secure it? Again, I mentioned earlier how long you have to keep it. And when you don't need to keep it anymore, how do you properly and securely dispose of it? And by the way, deleting things from your laptop is not properly deleting things. It's still there, just so you know. Even when you empty the trash, and we can talk about that in a little while, there are things called wipe utility programs. But simply deleting something, I think many, if not all of you know, doesn't actually delete it from your computer. So if you dispose of that computer, a hacker could easily uncover information that you had on that computer, even if it was deleted. So think about how you dispose of things, and things like crosscut paper shredders. Again, not just, dumpster diving still happens. Don't just throw things away. Don't throw out secure papers without making sure that they've been properly shredded. But these things happen still regularly. So I want to go over a little bit about what the stages of a malware, ransomware attack are. And I stress this, if you take one thing out of this, again, over 90% of cyber attacks that are successful, they start as phishing emails. That is a #1 issue and the #1 problem for successful hacks and phishing attacks. It's downloading malware, opening infected attachments. And again, some of the most insidious ones, you don't even have to click on an attachment. The fact that it came into your system sometimes can actually download that malware. But again, if you see an attachment and it asks you to click on that, ask yourself if you weren't expecting it, even if it's from a source that you think may be trusted. Don't assume that. People can have their own emails hacked, and it could look like it's coming from a friend or a colleague, and it isn't. So, and again, this happens regularly it could be your bank that you work with, it could be your credit card company you work with. Don't assume it's from them. Again, it's very easy to unfortunately cut and paste logos. This has happened in the past with BBB, where they've had phony complaints sent out to businesses like yours, alleging they're from BBB. They weren't from us. We sent out warnings telling them it wasn't from us. We don't operate this way. But they take trusted organizations and institutions, and they rely upon the fact that you or a staff member are going to click on that and then download the malware. And malware, it's insidious stuff. It can live, and I say that live in quotes, in your system, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a desktop. Some of the really insidious ones can be on there for months without realizing that you actually have that. They could have things like keystroke counters. So every time you type in, a code, a piece of information, a bank account number, it's feeding that to an external source, to a hacker, and they're getting all that information. They can basically attack your entire system. So everything that you had on that system has been available to someone else, a third party, for all those months you didn't realize it was there. So you have to look for those warning signs. Is your system not operating properly? Is it opening and closing? You have apps opening and closing without realizing it. If you have your phone, suddenly your phone is draining faster than usual. The battery life isn't there. That can be a sign that you have malware on the phone. Things aren't operating normally. You will see pop-ups that shouldn't be appearing. Difficulty operating your system. There are a lot of warning signs of malware, but some of the real insidious kinds, there are very few warning signs, but it's feeding things externally to the hackers. And again, one of the main ways is through attachments. And if you think that it's something important, go offline, contact your bank independently, contact your credit card company independently through your own contact information. You think it's from a friend or someone you've done business with. The bottom line is it's so easy to check offline. If you're not 100% sure it's what you were expecting, even if it looks like a very legitimate attachment, this day and age, you're better off not clicking on that. And again, often it takes even going to a website that's a fraudulent site. This has happened a lot during the pandemic. You had these great promotions for hard to find products, things that are cheaper. During the height of the pandemic, these were coming out with face mask sites, selling them for much cheaper than everyone else. And these were phony sites, and the whole point of that was as soon as you log on to the site, it's going to download malware it's going to cause you a lot of problems. That's where it deploys this code in your system. And again, it can access basically any of your system data, including things that are, and it can encrypt your files as well. And that's where you get these ransomware demands. You get the malware in there, it encrypts your entire hard drive, and that can kind of lock you down. So the biggest thing is to monitor and detect on this before the ransomware takes control of your system. By the way, for anyone that hasn't heard of this, this is kind of the gold standard. It's been in place for several years now. This is through the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's part of the Department of Commerce. It's been a collaborative effort between private industry and the government. It wasn't just the government regulating this. This was a combined effort to come up with a voluntary framework for how you kind of reduce problems with your own infrastructure, your own cyber risks. So they call it the NIST cybersecurity framework, and we're trying to make sure that people realize it affects small, mid-sized, large businesses. These apply to all. It doesn't matter if you're a one-person operation or a 50-person operation. Number one thing, you want to identify all the data you have, all the assets that you have to protect. And so again, if you have 5 employees, 10 employees, does everyone have a laptop with information that's accessible through that? Do you have, you have a group of hard drives? Do you have, one server? Do you have 2 servers, 3 servers? Do you back up your information to an offsite server? Where is all your data? Do you have 10 file cabinets with all data on it? What are your assets and what are your data? How are you protecting all this information? You want to look at how you protect this and how you limit the impact if there is a problem. And then the most important part here is how do you detect if there's a security problem beforehand? So again, identify what you have. How do you protect it beforehand? And that's things like firewalls and antivirus and anti-malware. And I'll stress, antivirus and anti-malware are often used interchangeably. And in essence, they're talking about the same thing. But the bottom line is that just having antivirus software is often not going to do the job. That often is covering the basics and the basic viruses. Again, some can be higher level than others, but anti-malware is specifically designed, the better anti-malware, to detect more current forms of malware, the more insidious forms of malware. And so if you just have basic antivirus, it's not going to necessarily protect you from all the current forms of malware that are going around. So you're thinking firewall, antivirus, and anti-malware. So they're not necessarily the same thing, even though they deal with the same thing. Then after having these things to detect it, how do you respond to this? If you do have a problem, if you think you've been hacked or they're trying to hack you, you can't wait a week, you can't wait 2 days, you want to deal with it immediately. So many problems can happen if you waited hours in many cases. How do you immediately respond effectively? How do you cut it off? So you see information's being hacked from your system, you see that there is an open entry point where someone's hacking into you. How do you cut that off? How do you stop that? You shouldn't be reading up on this or learning about it after you already have the problem. And then finally, so you've had a problem, you've had your information compromised. How do you get back to business? How do you recover? How do you not go out of business? And again, over the years, there've been a lot of small to mid-sized businesses that have had some very serious hacks and some very serious problems in this area. It's actually knocked them out of business. It's been a huge problem, and I think we all have enough problems these days. We don't need this, but it's gotten worse, particularly with the pandemic, and particularly with so many people working online, so many people working from home. It's made it an even bigger issue. So again, how do you recover from this without losing too much business, without your staff, without your vendors, and without your clientele, losing faith in you and not working with you anymore? So you see this. This is an actual attack from ransomware. If you see this, you're having a really bad day. It will say something very akin to this. Your information's been locked out. It's all been encrypted. You have, in this case, 96 hours to submit your payment. Again, they're usually looking for it in some kind of cyber currency, such as Bitcoin. And if you don't send it, they'll be permanently crypted. And unfortunately, even though you're dealing with criminals here, that's probably true. It probably will be permanently crypted, and you may never get this information again. So this can just completely stop you from operating. This is a big issue. You come back from lunch and see this, you have a problem. But you can often help yourself out of this problem if you follow a very basic approach. Again, so looking at your database, under the data, you've got, again, client, vendor information, account information. Say it hits you on one of your laptops, or maybe someone's working remotely, it hits them on their laptop, or it's the main one that you operate for your entire, maybe you have a one-person operation, and this is your computer, it locks everything out. Now, what have you done to protect yourself? Do you have email filters that filter out some of the real problem spam emails so it didn't happen in the first place? Number one, did you back up to an offsite external drive? If you're backing up, but it's connected to your drive and to your own database, it doesn't help you, because if they've locked all your information out, if it's on two separate drives or it's on one database, everything's locked out anyway, so it's not going to help you. And again, it's not that expensive to do that these days. It's very commonplace. Make sure that you are backing up your information on a daily basis offsite, something that isn't connected to your server, that isn't connected to your drive, something separate, so that if you have one that's been hit by a ransomware and it's been, all your information's been locked down, you have, again, up to the previous day, hopefully, because sometimes it's backed up hourly. You're going to have all your information saved separately and not impacted by this. That's where they don't have you. They have you if they have everything locked down and you have no external drive, but you're in a much better position if you have this backed up. It is worth it. Again, and it's not that expensive to do that. Again, make sure you had updated antivirus, anti-malware software, and I'm stressing with patches. What happens is that when you have antivirus, anti-malware software, the hackers find a weak link. They find a backdoor to get through that. And if you have a good company you're dealing with, a manufacturer of this software, they're going to put down what's known as a patch, and they're going to submit that patch to you when you have to upload the patch. But if they ask you to patch your software and you don't do that, it remains unprotected. So again, as long as you're sure it's coming from them, immediately make sure that you, your staff, everyone knows that when you have these patches, you have to make sure that you install the patches. Otherwise, that backdoor is wide open. There is a weak link that they found, and it stays a weak link, obviously. And again, we could talk more about this a little bit later, but advanced network firewalls, and again, the point of that is that it's blocking traffic that you don't think is trusted, access that you don't think is trusted. So if you have IP addresses you know are problematic, if you have traffic that you know is problematic, it can be designed to block all that traffic from coming into your system and allow access to traffic that you believe is more trustworthy. And again, firewalls are not very expensive. Make sure they are fully updated. You have, 5-year-old antivirus software. It should be in a museum. It's not going to help you. 3-year-olds isn't going to help you. You want it current and you want it updated regularly. So again, this is under protect, under detect. You get this message saying everything's been encrypted. You need a private decryption key, which they'll give you only if you pay this ransom, which again could be hundreds up to thousands of dollars. So what do you do to respond to it? Well, if you've been doing your homework before this and you properly protected yourself, you're going to deliver whatever computer was targeted to this, and whatever the backup is, you're going to give it to your support vendor. Anyone who's been working with you on your IT, and if you don't have an internal IT staff, which many or most of you don't, whoever's been managing that with you, and there are trustworthy companies that do this for a living, but you want to make sure that you stop using that computer, you stop using that laptop, because that's now locked down to you. You don't want to even touch it. Take it to the professional. So for the short term, you'll be able to have the use of alternative or offsite records. You have paper records. If you have this backup externally, you can use that. While you have to be, while you have to still operate, you still want to do business. Obviously, you don't want it to shut you down. And then you want to make sure that to recover from this, you're going to go ahead and wipe and replace the drive, which again, the professionals can do very easily. They have wipe utility programs. You will then reload Windows, you reload your database application, and then you can load your business data from your external backup drive, assuming you have that. So at that point, you don't pay the ransom and you can be back up and running. Now, some of the people, again, there are companies that actually work with you and they say that they're going to help work with the, during the ransom, and they're going to help get your information back. I want to bring up the fact that there have been a number of these companies that have been caught actually paying the ransoms. They tell you that they got your information, but all they did was actually pay the ransom to get the information back. So be very wary about that. It doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate companies who deal with this, but the bottom line is that if you're thinking of paying this ransom, you're dealing with criminals. And if you pay it once, there's a good chance they're going to come back to you again, because if you paid it once, they think you're going to pay it again. So you're going to have an increasing problem. And keep in mind, even if they give you back this decryption key, they may have kept some of your information. It may not give you all your information back. So look, it's going to be up to you, but the advice is not to pay the ransom, not to deal with the criminals. Obviously, there's a good chance they'll come right back to you the next time as well. So again, what's the goal of this 5-step approach? It is all about resilience. You go into this planning tool, you want to prepare what could happen, and you want to make sure that you can be resilient after there's been a problem. Again, look at these threat scenarios. Even as a small business, it's really easy to kind of game these scenarios. You look for, how do you present basic incidents? That's in terms of employee training, having them, go over, have regular meetings on what to look for in terms of phishing emails. We're going to talk about that in a little while. How do we reduce our time to recover? If there's a problem, who are the go-to people? Who's the person in charge of this? If I'm on vacation, who does someone, and some of my employees spot something, what do they do? Do they understand what the process is to deal with this and to shut it down? What are our requirements if we've been breached? You want to make sure, if you have a problem, if there's an incident that's happening right now, you can be resilient. You can deal with it immediately and you can recover from it. But you shouldn't get caught flat-footed here and find out after there's been a hack, you're scrambling. What do I do? How do I stop this? Where do I go? And unfortunately, that is all too often what happens, is you're scrambling because you didn't plan for it. I have this slide in here because over the years, I've had a number of people, including in the business world, say, Brian, I'm fine. I'm in the cloud. I have no problems here. Well, the cloud doesn't mean that, obviously. The cloud does not provide any specific layer of security. It's all about the vendor you're dealing with and what the security is within that cloud. It's just another form, another way of holding on to information and keeping information. So make sure when you're dealing with a vendor for a contract, that the security is very clearly spelled out in the vendor contract. Who's responsible for it? What are they doing for you? Are they maintaining the servers and the apps? And are they keeping them updated? Or is that going to be, when I say updated, I mean patched. It's a very, very important step, but make sure that you find out, are they the ones who are doing this? And then find out, is there a firewall protection put in place, and is there encryption provided to you? And again, are there, backup and recovery? So do they have backups for you if there's been a problem, if they've been hacked, if they've dealt with ransomware? And again, I know there are free services that offer this as well. I'm telling you to be very wary about it when it's free. Yes, free things are nice. But when you're talking about having a commercial contract that's been carefully reviewed to give you those proper legal protections, if you're using a free service and you've been hacked, there's virtually no protections to support any kind of a due diligence defense. If you want to say that people are challenging you because you haven't protected their information and used a free service with very limited protections and no agreement in terms of who is maintaining it, you're not going to be able to really show much of a due care defense that you really kept things the way you should have. So be real careful about using free services. It's worth it to make sure you're dealing with a highly trusted service that's encrypting things, providing backup, providing firewalls, things of that nature. So just keep that in mind. What have I been talking about this whole time? It's all about training. And again, so many of the things I'm telling you today, they're not expensive. They don't cost a lot of money at all. In many cases, they're free. And the number one thing is training your staff. Every time you see a risk or vulnerabilities, here we are, we're not a huge organization in our offices. We have a fair number of people. And if one of our IT folks sees there's a problem, if he sees there's a phishing email going around and there's a bad link to it, we'll get an immediate notice telling people, don't click on this. This is a problem. This has been going around. Make sure you avoid that. You want to train your staff on what to look for, what vulnerabilities are, how you can protect against phishing. Have regular meetings on this and tell them, listen, if you see this link and it doesn't look familiar, don't click on it. If you think it's from a fellow staff member, but it doesn't look right, don't click on it. Go offline, call them, find out, did you actually just send me this email? So again, clear office policies, clear procedures, these should be written down with regular reminders. And when I say empower your staff here, I think one of the worst mistakes you can make with an organization, doesn't matter how large or small you are, is having people feel very nervous about causing a data breach or a data problem with your organization and what the punitive measures are going to be. Because if that's the case, they may hide it. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to be chastised for it. So what's going to happen? They probably won't report it, or they'll wait a while to report it. So don't deal with this from a punitive method. You want to let people know you're encouraged to report it. You're doing the right thing by telling us. We're not firing you over this. We're telling you, have your eyes and your ears open. Look for problems. If you think you opened up something you shouldn't have, don't hide it. The worst thing you can do is not tell us about it. You clicked on a phishing email. Tell us immediately. Tell me. Tell if you have an IT person, whoever's managing this for you. It's an immediate process that we can help avoid bigger problems by you reporting it to us, not you hiding it. That includes things like losing your cell phone. Over the course of time, you bring your own device to work. A lot of people use their cell phones for work, and these days more than ever, people are often doing their entire jobs from tablets and cell phones and their laptops outside the office now. If they lost their cell phone, if they lost their laptop, they shouldn't just go and buy a new one and not tell you about it, particularly if it could have had access to the office information, to your database, if it could have been storing things on it. Highly encourage, if you've lost your phone, tell us about it immediately. We want to know what you had on it. We want to be able to lock it down. We want to be able to work with IT people and make sure that we minimize the damage. But the last thing you want to do is have your employees so scared to report this that they're going to probably hide it, unfortunately. Again, so some simple key policies, things like that. What's acceptable use of your information technology. Anyone who is accessing your information and your network has to agree to, read to it, sign it, which means if you say you're not allowed to use your cell phone to access certain things, they have to agree to that. If you say you can't, you can only use your tablet to access information, but you can't store information on it, they're signing off on that. You can very easily say that if you're going to use, it's very common these days, and up until not that long ago, people to be doing a lot of their work from a coffee shop. They have their laptop set up there, they have it set up on their back porch or their kitchen table or whatever. And if they're using that to access your information, that's one thing. If they're now storing data on that laptop, on that tablet, that becomes a much bigger problem. So your program could say, listen, if you want to access this information appropriately, that's fine, but you are prohibited from keeping that information, from keeping your client data, from keeping your vendor data on that laptop or on your phone. Delete those emails. Don't hold on to those emails if you have them and it has employee information on it, things like that. So it's all about training and awareness and reminders, asking people how they're using their phones. Are they password protecting their laptops? Are they password protecting their phones? Things like that are so important, and reminders. So each week, each month, have meetings about this. And again, all devices, again, when you're away from your desk, if you're still at work these days, or if you're traveling, whether it's a cell phone or a tablet, make sure they're secure, make sure they're not being left in cabs, make sure that they're locked down, and they have, again, some of the better ones. I know a lot of the Apple products, you can have fingerprint protection in terms of opening it. So if you don't have any of these protections in place, it's not going to help you. Passwords, again, I'm not saying it has to be every 90 days, but just as a general rule, every few months, don't have the same password for everything you do. And for the last year or two, it doesn't help. There's a good chance it's going to be compromised. So make sure that if one is compromised, you don't have the same password for 10 accounts that you have. And again, I know it gets difficult to remember 20 different passwords. The fact is, every employee should not be using the same password. These are workarounds where you hear 5 staff members from one department, they all use the same password, which, by the way, sometimes can be all ones or all zeros. Amazingly, in this country, 3 of the most common passwords are still password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Incredibly, those 3 are still among the top group of passwords. It's easy, but it doesn't help anyone. So long and strong, which means a combination of letters and numbers and symbols to make it that much tougher. Remember, several years ago, I sat in a panel and there was an agent from the FBI, and they had done an entire study on this. If you have an easy password, again, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type password, it can take a hacker 2 minutes versus a long and strong one can take 2 years. So it doesn't mean it can't be hacked, but 2 minutes versus 2 years. So think about that and think about changing them regularly. Even if you are alternating them, don't keep the same password for 3 years. Make sure that is part of the acceptable use policy, the technology policy. You're asking and requiring your employees, they're going to get that notice in, say, 3 months or 2 months or 4 months. Time to update your password to access our system. And again, if it's been compromised, it's got to be changed immediately, and that password has to be locked down at that point. And again, personnel security, we've talked a little bit more about that. And in terms of your email, keep in mind, regular email is not protected. Regular email is very hackable. If there is something that is sensitive data in it, it needs to be encrypted. So if you have 2 different offices, one is sending information to the other and it contains PII, that person identifiable information, it should be encrypted. You're sending it by regular email is wide open. It is not, you are not complying with a proper cyber policy by doing that. So keep in mind, a lot of people think email is more secure. Faxing would be more secure than an email. Believe it or not, people still fax. That and snail mail are more secure than regular email. So keep in mind, If it's sensitive data, make sure it's encrypted. And again, we talked a bit earlier about having, if you have a security incident, have a response plan. So don't wait to scramble if you've had a problem. You want to have something in place, again, whether it's 3 people or 10 people in an organization, investigate these incidents immediately. What do you do to stop the vulnerability? So if you know you've been hacked, if you see a problem, how do you cut it off immediately? How do you make sure that nothing worse happens? If you see that you've had a problem with one laptop and it hasn't necessarily gotten to the system, it hasn't infected others, it hasn't infected your server, how do you shut that down? How do you assess that? And then who do you notify? There were a lot of laws in place, both on the state and the federal level, where you were required to tell people about a cyber incident. We wonder why we hear about these so often these days. Well, over the years, the laws have gotten stricter, now requiring companies to tell you that there's been a problem, that your information was potentially compromised. That's why you hear about all these incidents now. Many, many years ago, there weren't such requirements in place. That's why it may have happened. You just didn't know about it. So again, you as a small, mid-sized business, you have a requirement. If you've had your customer information compromised, your employee information, this is internal as well, health information, vendor information, you have a legal obligation to immediately notify those who've been impacted by this. Again, even though I'm an attorney, I can't give you legal advice here, but I will tell you there are laws in place, and you have to follow those laws, obviously. And again, these are both on the state and on the federal level for data breaches, for suspected data breaches. That's why you keep hearing about these huge breaches, such as the Facebook one, where again, about 500 million people were impacted. We have a kind of a natural breakup built in here. We're a little bit more than halfway. If there are any questions, feel free to shout them out. Lauren, Melanie, here to try and answer some of them.
I did see a few come in. The first is, when you recommend backing up to offsite drive, would Dropbox be sufficient and keep everything protected?
What was the last? Oh, you said Dropbox. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the key thing, and again, without recommending any specific, product or service, obviously, because we don't do that. Yeah, the biggest thing is that there has to be a disconnect. There can't be, as long as something is fully backed up on a regular basis and it's not connected to your actual system. So the number one thing, whether it's that or anything else you're working with offsite, is that it can't be attached to your server. It has to be a separate server, a separate database, because if you have something where it's connected to your server and the server's been locked down, it's going to impact everything. So the number one thing to remember when you're backing things up, and I say offsite, I mean, when I say offsite, I'm saying that in quotes, it has to be backed up separately so it's unattached to your system. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a physically separate building. It has to be backed up where the two systems aren't talking to each other. They're not connected to each other. So just to be clear. So it's a good question. Yeah.
I work from home and sometimes go to a local coffee shop to get my work done. I log on to their Wi-Fi, but they have the password on the wall so all customers can connect. Is that still safe?
I'm so glad you asked that. And I know I referenced that earlier, and boy, I think more and more these days, with restaurants opening up for internal seating and people who very often say, I'm sick of working at home, I'm gonna go to a coffee shop. I strongly, strongly recommend about never, ever using the public Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or any place else. It is a guaranteed problem at some point in time, even if it's not that time. There are hackers that monitor these. These are open systems. They're not protected at all. The fact that they're giving you their password, it may be password protected to get into it, but anyone has access to it. It's a public Wi-Fi network. So by definition, it is not secure. So if you are dealing with anything you care about, whether it's personally, you're doing your banking or credit card or paying bills, accessing anything you care about, and God forbid you're doing things for work that are accessible there, it is 100% not secure. So I'm so glad you asked that, but definitely do not ever use public Wi-Fi for anything that you care about. No.
I have a phone that asks me to draw a line to connect dots as my password. Do you feel that that's more or less secure than pressing the numbers in?
I don't think it's a matter of more or less. It's different, and that's interesting. But yeah, I think that if you have something like that, as long as it's properly configured, I don't see a problem with that. The fact that you have it, that you have something required to do is great. Again, a lot of the iPhones, You can use your finger. I know sometimes it doesn't always work perfectly to do that. So that's, biometrics, which is again finger eye recognition, can definitely provide a higher level of security. I think what you've described certainly can provide the basic level of security to get in. I guess it's less than if someone were to, again, but if it's something that, by the way, anyone could do, just to keep in mind, I'm not sure exactly how yours is configured, but if it's to get in, anyone can do that, then no, it's not very secure. If it's something that only you knew what to draw, then that's what would make it more secure. So keep in mind, it can't be something that anyone can guess. The same way if you have your phone locked down and it's 5 ones to get in, not really very secure to do the whole 5 ones. So just make it a little bit tougher than that. It's a good question, though.
Is it safe to use an online password generator?
I've had this question come up a number of times before. It really depends on the source. If it's a scam company using that, then they're obviously going to know your password. So remember, a lot of times the scammers actually do things that are supposedly helping you. You'll get that email saying, we've detected a flaw in your system. We've detected that your system is now facing a malware problem. Download this to protect yourself. Obviously, that's what just downloaded the malware. So you may have a scam company reach out and say, we provide a wonderful service. We're going to automate and generate all your passwords for you. It turns out that they're the ones who are scamming you. They now have all your passwords. So the number one thing is make sure that you're dealing with a legitimate company doing this, that they're trustworthy, and that they're actually generating passwords that they're not going to then use themselves. That said, yeah, there are people who rely upon that rather than having it written down on a sticky note in your wallet, which I don't recommend. I've known people, they have their ATM cards and they write their PIN numbers on their ATM card. Please don't ever do that. That scares me. And again, they write their passwords on a sticky note next to their computer. So yeah, that can actually be a helpful thing. There are places that will store all your passwords for you. To me, the number one thing is make sure the password is never near the device. It isn't something recognizable. You can keep it on a little list yourself and make sure it's hidden away in your home where it's secure and no one will find it. But yeah, I mean, it can be a legitimate thing to do, but make sure you know the company you're dealing with that's doing it for you. So that's a good question.
You mentioned something in your last response that actually is related to another question. So it was a nice
Good.
segue. A lot of my friends are using websites that store passwords for your account. What are your thoughts on these websites and are they safe?
Yeah, and again, it's a lot of what I said before. It's all about who's doing it and what the website is. If the website doesn't have proper security themselves, then by definition, that's a problem. If that website can be hacked, they've just gotten access to all your passwords, obviously. So make sure you really check out this company beforehand. Again, you can search and see what BBB knows about them. There are a lot of other sources to see with whom you're dealing. Do they have a legitimate reputation? Have they had a lot of problems or hacks? Find out what other consumers are saying about them. And you want to make sure you look at their privacy policy and their security policy. What are they doing with your information? How are they protecting your information? What level of security and encryption are they using? Again, it must be encrypted. So if they're not using high-level encryption, I would certainly stay away from them. But if you've checked them out and you're comfortable, they have a very good reputation, they have a good track record, you're not seeing a lot of complaints, and they have a high level of encryption that they're using, I know people can rely upon that. It may make it easier for them to have 10 different passwords and hold on to those. And I'll tell you, if that helps you to not use the same password, that's a good thing. I can't tell you how many people, they can have 15 different accounts. They use the exact same password for 15 accounts. So if they get you for one, they got you for everything. Your kid's name, your birthday, where you went to college, you name it. I mean, wow, make it a little bit tougher on them. Don't say if they went to UCLA, everything says UCLA too. Make it tougher on them. So yes, you should have a variety of passwords and change them regularly. Good question.
We'll do one more, and then the other questions that came in relate to the cloud and Apple, which I know you're going to touch on in the next little portion. So,
Yeah.
how do I protect my tablet and cell phone to the degree I protect my laptop?
I'm so glad you asked that. And it's almost like you were seeing other parts of another program I presented. Yeah, this is one of my biggest pet peeves, and I mean that positively. But people don't, for some reason, most people don't view their cell phones as powerful computers. Your cell phone is a powerful computer. It's just really small. In many cases, it can be more powerful than your tablet or your laptop in some cases. People don't treat their cell phones in a way that they would their laptop, which means they often don't have antivirus, anti-malware software on it. They keep information stored on it. So if you're using your cell phone for work, which by the way, let's be real, most people are doing that now. They have a ton of information stored on their cell phone. They're accessing work through their cell phone. They're sending emails back and forth with potentially customer information on it, financial information on it, and they're saving those emails on their phone. And by the way, even deleting those, they're probably still on your phone. So keep in mind that if you're using your phone that way to access things for work, you're keeping invaluable PII on that phone. You should be investing in anti-malware on that phone. And I will tell you a downside of that is that it could affect your battery life. It could drain a little bit faster. I get that part. You know, you're weighing the pros and the cons. To me, the pros of that far outweigh the cons in terms of battery life. But if you are using your phone in that way, yes, make sure that you have it properly protected. Treat it like a computer. Don't save anything you don't have to save on it. Think about anti-malware. Talk to your local vendor and find out about having a malware installed on your phone. Which phones are better for that? And since I know it was a question you probably have sitting there about Apple, to be clear, if you have an iPhone or if you have other Apple products, for some reason, many years ago, there was this fallacy that Apple products could never, ever be subject to compromise or any form of malware or anything. That's just not true. I think most people know that now, but for some reason, people maybe don't know that. You need to protect iPhones. Again, I know some of them have built-in protections. Some of them actually come, with some pretty good software on those, so it doesn't mean it doesn't. But just because your product says Apple on it doesn't mean it can't ever be infected. Yes, it can. You still have to protect that information, regardless of the fact whether it's an Android or an Apple, even though Apple may not be affected in quite the same way. And they could have some very secure products. It does not mean it's immune, because it is by no means immune. So just keep that in mind. Did I answer the rest of that question, or did I have more to go on that?
You sure did. And I believe we're good to go for the next little segment that you have.
Excellent.
So I'll turn off my camera. Thank you.
Feel free. Anyone who wants to turn on their camera, by the way, feel free if you want to do that. No problem. Happy to chat. And by the way, if anyone has really specific questions that they think are only specific to their situation, they don't think that it may be impacting anyone else on this webinar, you can feel free after the fact. I can stay on afterwards. I can certainly, Lauren or can provide my email, or Melanie can provide my email address. I'm happy to try and see if I can help if I can. I want to post this from the FTC. I think it's a great guide. It came out several years ago, but it offers some really good information about practical things you can do, and some kind of seminal cases they brought in recent years. Some of these are going back a little while, but to me, they have a really good example of what not to do. And I offer these up because there are a lot of businesses that you've heard of and you know fairly well. I have my little disclaimer there because, again, we are not the FTC, but it doesn't mean anyone actually violated the law. They had reason to believe there was a potential problem, but it doesn't mean because I'm listing them that they actually violated the law. So that's the attorney in me telling you that. Okay, they have a number of tips. Start with security seems very obvious, but what it really means is that in everything you do in your business, and by the way, you're all people too, in your home life and how you pay your bills and how you deal with your life online, always factor in security. Again, many years ago, this seemed like it was a pie in the sky thing. It's not going to happen to me. I think we all know better. It happens to almost everyone. It is that big a problem. I'll share with you quickly. Several years ago, not that many years ago, I had a problem myself, and I lecture on this stuff because my accountant's office was hacked. She had, again, all of her people working remotely, or at least most of them were, and one of her employees with a laptop, not properly protected, got hacked. And all of her information was out there. And for me, that's all my tax return information, not a good thing. And how did I find out? I got a lovely letter from the IRS telling me that a return was filed under my name, and my wife got the same letter under her name. To the IRS's credit, we're very meticulous about our taxes, and it must not have looked like the way we file our return, and we file jointly. They flagged it as probably not being our return. It most definitely was not our return, but a phony return was filed in our name, in my name and in my wife's name. So thankfully, they did not give my refunds to some hacker, to some scammer, but it caused a lot of problems. And it was because of one staff member with a laptop that wasn't properly secure accessing the information. They did not start with security. Just so you know, for myself, I contacted the IRS, I contacted the FTC, I contacted the big three credit agencies, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. I put in place a not just a fraud alert, but I actually put a credit freeze on mine. Freeze is a much higher level of protection than a fraud alert. It actually locked down my 3 accounts, and they are separate, so you want to freeze all 3. And by the way, if you're buying a car or doing another mortgage, you can just unfreeze them. It's not very difficult to do that. I made sure that I did all the things that I tell people to do to make sure that I kind of lock this down. And I now have a special number that I file with the IRS to file my tax return. I try and file it earlier if I can, because that helps to prevent anyone from filing it fraudulently under your name before you get yours in. So keep that in mind, is that it can happen to anyone, even if you have a lot of information on this. So just be real careful with that. Felt the need to share that. And again, requiring secure passwords and authentication, a huge deal. I will stress 2FA, two-factor authentication, for your staff, internally, for your customers. Again, whether it's a cell phone or a card that you have, and along with a long secure password, long and strong, letters, numbers, symbols. Please, not one that's easily guessable. And again, when you're storing personal information securely, protect it when you're transmitting the information. We're going to talk about a business that had a real problem with that in a couple of slides from now. And when I say segment your network, we're talking about things like, again, I mentioned firewalls earlier. Another company got in trouble with this. If you're holding on to, say, a bunch of your customer data, and you're holding on to some of your employee data, say their health insurance information or payroll information you have for your internal staff, then you have your people who, your vendor information. Is there a need to have all this together in one area? So what I'm saying is, if you have one part of your network compromised, it means everything's compromised. By segmenting it, which means these things aren't, there's a block, there's a wall up between them. So if you have a wall between your internal data for, say, your employees and payroll, and another wall up between your vendor data, and then a third wall up between, and this is not that difficult to do, by the way. Another wall is up for all of your customer information and those who access your website or pay things online. Well, then if one of them is impacted, if one of them is compromised or hacked, then the worst case scenario is it's limited to that. But if it's not segmented, then if your network is compromised, everything is compromised. All your information, your employees, your vendors, your internal information, your credit card information, everything. So this is a way of limiting the damage. I know if you're a small business owner, maybe you're rolling your eyes saying, I'm not going to do that. And I get it's not realistic for everyone to do that. But if you can separate this out and have things on separate servers and separate databases, protected separately, individual firewalls, and you can segment your network, you're really helping yourself, and you're really limiting the amount of damage that can be done if only one of them is damaged and not everything you have. And again, I stress this, remote access to your network more than ever. That's why it's up there. Right now in this day and age, again, vast majority of people are accessing your information off-site, including yourself, I'm sure, who are on this calls, usually through 1, 2, or 3 different devices there. Make sure that who's ever accessing your network is doing it securely. Again, there's that 1 weak link. I paid the price for my accountants having 1 weak link. 1 laptop is all it took, and all of our clients were impacted. So again, make sure that you're dealing with service providers that you trust and that you're taking reasonable measures. And again, I mentioned Target earlier. The breach occurred with a vendor. That was their weak link. And remember, if you contract with someone to work with you and to do something and deal with client information, even if you think it's fairly innocuous stuff, the fact is they're your agent. You hired them, you retained them, you contracted with them. If they have low-level service that gets hacked easily, your responsibility. And if your customer information is hacked through them, it's still your customer information and you still have a problem. So be real careful about when you're dealing with your service providers. So if you have wonderful security and you have SSL, secure socket layer protection for all of your credit card information, and your website's locked down, and then you're busy working with a vendor that has none of this, well then all those protections you've taken and you put into place, they're meaningless at that point. So be real careful about with whom you work. And if, by the way, you ask a vendor to give you assurances about what they're doing for privacy and security policies and what they're using specifically, and they refuse to give it to you or they refuse to tell you about it, why would you work with them? That's a gigantic red flag. If they're using proper security, they're going to want to tell you about it, obviously. And again, I talked about securing physical media, papers, devices. A lot of people forget this. You have some small businesses, they could be storing a bunch of stuff in their garage or in file cabinets that aren't even locked. It could be available to anyone. So take a real long look at where you're keeping your information, what you have stored around the house, particularly these days. Are people working from their kitchens, from their living rooms? Do they have papers stacked up there? Are they dealing with employee information? Do you have your HR person working from home, keeping all of her employee data out on their kitchen table? Really take stock of who's doing what, who has information available, how they're locking it down, because if you have a problem, you're going to want to know that you took these steps beforehand. These are real issues these days. And again, this is more of my techie slide, so I apologize, but it's important stuff. You want to look at things like phishing detection systems. Again, you're going to block things out. Phishing is so common now. Spam is so common now. You can get hundreds of pieces of spam in a week or more in some cases. You want to have higher level spam filters to filter out most of the problematic stuff. Yes, some will definitely get in. It happens, unfortunately, but you want to at least root out the majority of it. And again, you want to at least root out whatever phishing emails you can. So I'd rather have that than not have it in place. On a slightly higher level, there are things called threat intelligence systems. What they do is they look for URLs that are potentially problematic, URLs that contain malicious codes that are, kind of blacklisted URLs, problematic stuff. So if you have those, it will kind of flag these things and stop them from impacting your system. We talked about network firewalls. These are a must, obviously. You have specific rules that are going to block problematic traffic and going to allow in the stuff that you want to allow in. So again, you want to do a whole analysis to flag. They're called executables. That's what executes the malware, and it goes right into your system. So if you have a proper firewall, that again, make sure it is updated, make sure that it is state of the art. You don't want a 5-year-old firewall that you've never looked at. It's not going to help you. That has specific rules by an IT person that knows what they're doing. That makes sure that you're going to block whatever you can at the source. That's what that wall is in place for, to prevent traffic that could cause major damage. And again, you can try and block if you have a spam or IPs that are problematic, that are fraudulent. If you have enough spam there and you detect that, so say you've had a huge amount of spam, all deriving from a certain IP address, you can block that, you can blacklist that, or it's not going to come through. And again, once again, I stress the offsite backups for everything that's critical data. And as I mentioned, the segmented part, so it's separate from your system. That is so key, not just with protecting your data from completely being impacted, but in case it's all locked down, you want to make sure that you have something totally separate on a daily basis that you can access if all heck breaks loose and all your system, and you're locked out of your system, obviously. And again, this bottom part, it's easy to do this in many cases, even as a small business. Do simulations. Where are you vulnerable? Think about it logically. What can cause a problem for my company? What can cause a problem for my business? You test your employees. If you have don't actually send malware to anyone, obviously, but if you send out phishing emails and people are falling for it, you have a problem. That's social engineering, by the way. That's things like phishing, getting people to click on things they shouldn't. You send out that phishing email, that test email, and find out you have 10 staff members and 8 of them all clicked on that. Again, not with actual malware on it, but they clicked on it, and it turns out, my God, my employees need some retraining. They all fell for it, or 2 people fell for it. In a very positive way, you're not chastising them. Again, you don't want to scare them about this. It's not about that. You say, hey, we happen to notice this. I recognize it's easy to fall for. But if you're not sure about this, remember, it may not be coming from a fellow staff member or from a vendor. Check offline. Here's what you do. Here's to report it to if you see a problem. These things are crucial, and they're really easy to do, actually. But keep people on their toes. Make sure that they're actually aware of this, because if you haven't had a problem ever in your company, or you haven't had a problem for a while, they say it's not a matter of if you've been, hacked. It's when you're going to be hacked, unfortunately. So if people have this false sense of security, they shouldn't, because at some point there's a decent chance that someone's going to try and hack you, and you want to stop it beforehand. Again, so this is going over some of the FTC statements here. This is something like what I mentioned earlier. Again, what kind of information do you have? What are you collecting? Should I be collecting all this information? Why have I retained credit card information for 100 clients for 10 years and I don't need it anymore? Who do you share it with? Who can access it? So is it locked down? Can anyone access the information? This is what I have on the right here. It's that culture of security. Your staff, your vendors, Every time you deal with something or information on a daily basis, you're thinking about, is it secure? How am I dealing with it? Do I have a flaw here? Am I keeping credit card information that anyone can access? And should I be doing that? And again, I'm going to start giving you some examples here. FTC didn't like this. Access to data. When I say restrict access to sensitive data, the problem we had, and this is Twitter, so this is kind of a tech company. This happened a while ago, but they gave apparently administrative access to most of their employees. And this really increased their risk of a breach. So imagine this, you have a secretary that was just hired and a senior vice president. Imagine if they each have the same administrative access to information and PII, client data and employee data. Makes no sense, obviously. You want to have, if you have 10 people in your employee and 2 of them need access to certain things, and only those 2 should have that access. Only 2 should have those administrative privileges. Say you have someone who deals with HR, employee information, maybe they're the only one other than you who should be able to access that information. Everyone should not have access to that information. It makes absolutely no sense to do that. Restrict access to sensitive data to those who need it to perform their jobs and only their jobs. If there's a legal reason they need access to that, a specific business reason, if not, then each person should be assigned the appropriate level of administrative privilege. But even a large company like that, apparently virtually everyone had administrative privileges. That creates problems. I mentioned 2-factor authentication earlier and complex passwords. Yet again, a software company, another FTC case from a while back. They had network credentials that were stored in clear text, and what that means is they weren't encrypted. And again, this is a software company. So you had a hacker who was trying to access the credit card information, and turns out they didn't need to even deal with encryption. So they hacked in, and right there in basic clear text that anyone can read, it was there, instead of having credentials encrypted, which is not that difficult to do. So things were not protected. I also wanted to mention there are things like brute force attacks, and basically that's where you have a program that's designed to try as many logins as they can until they find the right one. They look for security flaws. You can easily deal with that by limiting those. So if, say, there are 5 failed attempts, it's going to lock them out to do that. So there are basic things you can do. And unfortunately, even larger companies haven't always taken those steps. It's the case, another case there. They had a lot of sensitive customer data that was encrypted, and it was collected on the website. And here's the problem. They then decrypted it and emailed it via regular email to their branch offices to take all this time and effort. And again, this could even apply to you. Say you have 2 offices and you have a website that works out of one office, deals with the website information. It's a secure website. You have all the encryption in place and everything's all secure. And then you go ahead and you send it by regular email to your other office. You've lost all the protections that you took all that time and effort to put in place, obviously. So their problem is they had all this encrypted information. They decrypted all of it and sent it by regular email to the branch offices. They lost all their information in terms of their security. So keep that in mind. And again, I'm just stressing this again, regular email isn't a secure method for sending it. Even a fax is more secure than doing that. So just keep that in mind. And if you do encrypt sensitive data through your website, again, don't suddenly decrypt it and send it externally anywhere in regular text. It is not that difficult to encrypt something and to send it to one of your other offices. That should be standard office policy, obviously. Next case, DSW, that's the shoe company, fairly large as well. This is a case of not segmenting their network. Again, not all computers need to communicate with each other. You can have one computer set up in your office, again, I mentioned, just to deal with employee information and payroll information. You could have a separate one that deals only with customer credit card information if you're dealing with that. They don't all have to talk with each other. In this case, their computers weren't connected. They were connected across the store and all their networks. Again, so they have various stores and their corporate networks. So if you have a problem, everything's impacted. So maybe they had a problem at one of their stores, but imagine, and it could have been limited to that store. But if all your stores and your corporate network are all together, then everyone has that problem. So that makes absolutely no sense. If you can segment it, try and do that. Even for a small business, it's actually not that difficult to keep the information separate depending on what area you're dealing with. So that if you have a problem with one, it doesn't mean that you have this huge problem with everything. Again, this sometimes surprises people. This was actually LifeLock. There's an irony there, obviously, from a while back. Believe it or not, their employee computers that they used to remotely access our network didn't actually have apparently antivirus programs. Again, there's a real irony there. So that was a problem, obviously. I'm guessing the FTC didn't like that very much. And again, before you're enabling any remote access, you want to look at what vendor you're working with, any third-party security, because you are responsible for that. And with your staff, again, phones, tablet, laptops, security, make sure they are secure. You should be using a VPN, which is a virtual private network. They are not particularly expensive. They're fairly easy to take care of. So if you have everyone you're dealing with working remotely, I encourage you to look into operating on a virtual private network. You have 5 people working from home, 2 people working from here and there, and you have someone working from a coffee shop. Anytime they access your system, they have to log in to that VPN. And so everything is controlled. It's just through that own network there. They're not logging in, to use the example earlier, through public Wi-Fi. It is a lockdown private network. So really stress that. If you have people working remotely these days, and that's probably most, if not all of you, they should be working through a virtual private network, if at all possible, obviously. And then on top of that, make sure that when anyone is working from home and they see I'm using my laptop, check it out first. You have the obligation to do that. If it's office issued, well, that's fine. You know that you have upgraded firewalls on that laptop, updated antivirus, anti-malware on that, and you have a patch schedule for that. But if someone is using their 10-year-old laptop that's never been checked over, that doesn't have any firewalls on it, and they're accessing your information, what are you doing? So find out beforehand who's using what. And again, it's easy to find this out. Go to every staff member you have who's working remotely, look at yourself and find out, have your IT people, or you, if you don't have an IT person, have you looked at this and made sure that it has the basics in it, that you're comfortable, it's got the basic software, you're comfortable that it's been upgraded, that it's been patched, and that they know that if there's a patching schedule, they have to follow that. Because again, it takes one weak link and all your information is going to be exposed. So just keep that in mind. Next case, a company called uPromise. They'd work with a vendor, and under that, they were supposed to have a lot of security features installed into their browser toolbar. Unfortunately, they didn't check with their vendor and didn't even check that the contract was followed, and these requirements weren't followed by their vendor. So even though they contracted for certain security requirements, if the vendor doesn't put them in, that's your problem. And so the reason I have this in there is that you are responsible, again, for the vendors and those you work with and their contracts. So if you have an IT person that you've hired to work with your system and to put in place certain protections or to set things up or to set up your VPN, you have to verify they did their jobs. You have to verify compliance. You may not be a tech person, but you know enough to make sure the contract requires them to do this. And then after they've done this, you ask them to show you and confirm with you X, Y, and Z were done, that you put in these security features, and have them explain it to you. Because if they don't, you're the one on the hook for it. And again, this is Fandango. Again, for the movie ticket folks there, this was a case from a while back as well. The problem here is they had a security warning that was categorized as a customer service request, so it was ignored. So the bottom line is that, this is what I'm saying, if you have a network problem, if you have an employee that had a problem, it doesn't matter if you discover it if you don't do anything about it. So they actually ignored that, to their detriment, obviously. So if you have a credible warning, you have to act on it, which means that this is training for your staff. If your computer isn't acting normally, tell us immediately. If it looks like you've downloaded malware, tell us immediately. If you have something, if you come back to that horrible encryption code problem, and you see that you're now the subject of ransomware, you call them and tell them immediately that it happened. If you have a credible warning, you have to make sure that whether it's just you alone and you have an IT person you have to tell, or if it's 3 people in the field working for you, they have to know the second you get this, they have to tell you. It can't wait, obviously. And then you can look on cutting off the vulnerability and on making sure that you can stop it from getting even worse, obviously. And again, you see up there, I talked about a third-party patching schedule. If you have antivirus, anti-malware, make sure that for all your system stuff, if you have 10 laptops that you're using through your offices, you have a patching schedule so that you're checking regularly. Was there an update? Did everyone do that? You're checking each laptop and saying, well, I know there's an update to, it was a flaw in this particular antivirus program. There was an update 2 months ago. Make sure does everyone have that update installed? And you ask, you can check on this very easily. If 8 out of 10 have, Those two under that patching schedule, make sure that they're patched and that they're updated as well. It's easy to do. Finally, you have one. This was another FTC case from a while back, All Financial. This dealt with two problems: an internal problem, an employee doing something they shouldn't be doing, who sold additional hard drives, and they had unencrypted information on it. So it had a lot of customer information, over 34,000 customers. They sold the hard drives, and it had unencrypted sensitive information on it. So there was so much wrong with that, obviously. So again, keeping in mind when you have information on your laptops, on your tablets, on your computers, if you are doing the right thing and donating them because you have excess computers, you're updating them. Use a wipe utility program to make sure that everything's cleaned out of those computers, obviously. It's not just it's better than just making sure it's encrypted. You want to have nothing on there. And deleting, as you mostly know, or I think all of you know that, deleting doesn't really delete it. Even if you empty the trash, a really good hacker, it's still probably accessible, believe it or not. So the bottom line is that if you have 10 computers and you're going to all donate them or you're getting rid of them, consider using, I would strongly advise using a wipe utility program to make sure that it really is cleaned from all of your information and it's not hanging out there, obviously. And again, be very careful about employees selling your equipment without you knowing it. That's the other issue. And again, disposing of sensitive information. Don't do the dumpster thing. Make sure that you have this in your employee policy. Secure with how you deal with disk drives. Everything you're securing, make sure that it's that there's a requirement on when you have to shred things. You can't just throw them away. These are all things that you have to make sure you train your employees on. And there's real no expense in training. Training is free. It's just a matter of helping your employees to understand the rules. And again, I'll stress to you, it can still happen, as I say, the old-fashioned way. Lost or stolen paper documents. When you're in an office setting, again, does everyone need access to everything? If you have an HR room and your employee data is in a certain file cabinet, make sure those file cabinets stay locked throughout the day. If you have a file room and two people need access to it, why should everyone have access to it? Make sure that that file room is locked down. If you have a computer that's used for entering customer data or accessing customer data, does everyone in the office need access to it? Do the cleaning folks need access to it? So make sure that that's locked down and it's password protected. These are really basic things. And where are you storing your paper, flash drives, backup? Take a good look at your office situation. You may be shocked to find out that when people leave their, again, people who are still working in the office, they could have piles that they're working on at their desk. Well, it should be that culture of security. When I'm done working, I have 20 bits of customer information and I have it all in that proper order on my desk. I'm going to get to it tomorrow, so I leave it on my desk. No, you nicely file it back, you keep it in your locked drawer, and then you take the 3 minutes or 5 minutes the next day and you take it out of your drawer. So is it a little bit of a pain? Sure. Is it worth it? Absolutely. It has to be that culture where they say, listen, I'm dealing with, with 10 pieces of vendor information here. I know I have to lock that down. I'm dealing with, HR information. I have to lock that down. If you're going to lunch, just stick it in your drawer and keep it in a locked drawer. But it shouldn't just be sitting out there for anyone to see, obviously. So the bottom line is that it's legitimate business need to staff that needs it. If they don't need it, if there's no legitimate staff or employee need for it, why have access to it online? Why have access to the certain room? Why have access to a certain file cabinet? So really go around and look at what your office setting is, the laptop situation, credentials, access to things, who needs access to what, and who has access that they really shouldn't have, obviously. And it doesn't even have to be a rogue employee, by the way. It doesn't have to be someone up to no good. It could be someone who is just careless, or someone who doesn't understand the rules properly, or someone who's very lax in their job. That's all it takes. So just keep that in mind. And again, what's proper in terms of disposal? We're almost at the end, by the way, guys. I know it's a lot of information. But what's reasonable and appropriate, to prevent unauthorized access for your industry, for your area, for the size of your office, the data sensitivity. If you're dealing with customer data such as bank account information, credit card information, employee data logs like their health insurance information, that's high level. You want a much higher level of security based on that data sensitivity, obviously. If it's not dealing with personally identifiable information, maybe it's a little bit lower level of that, but it's really based upon, what level of data sensitivity you're holding on to in terms of your requirements to how to protect that. And again, electronic files, again, destroy, erase them. Don't just throw them away, obviously. I mentioned wipe utility programs. What they're essentially doing is they're overwriting the entire hard drive. So hackers aren't going to be able to usually access that after you've gotten rid of these computers. And again, I stress deleting files does not actually delete those files. Okay, so keep that in mind. So as a wrap up, just to finish with this, you're dealing with taking inventory of all the technologies you use, all those points of access to your information. How many employees do you have? How do they access your data? Are they all using cell phones, tablets, laptops? Where are they using that? What paper data do you have? What about your paper records? What's a likely threat, in terms of all this information? How do I protect it? What do I have in place? Do I have employee policies, written policies? Do I have policies in place if there's been a breach? Who do I contact? What are my legal requirements? If I'm working with the cloud, what does my vendor contract say? Who's responsible for patching? Things like that. What's in place to be ready for a cyber incident if it happens? And again, unfortunately, there's a decent chance it's going to happen at some point. Hopefully it doesn't. How do I detect it before it's a problem? What's going to tell me about a threat to my system? Is someone trying to log in at 2 in the morning and download a ton of data? What's the problem there? What's going to compromise it? How do I detect that beforehand? And so much of this is training. Train your staff. This is free. Train your personnel. How do I know when to report threats? How do I spot a red flag that there's a problem, there's an incident? Detection is key. So if your staff and yourself are trained to look for it, look for the phishing email, look for the problem, look for something that doesn't look right on their laptop. You're having the programs are opening and closing on their own. You have a cell phone that's battery is draining faster than usual, could have malware on it. Let them know I have a problem. Why did this app just close on its own? Why does this not operate properly? Potential malware, detect and tell people about it. And then how do I contain it? How do I lock it down? Make sure it doesn't get worse. Make sure I can maintain my operations, at least short term. And then how do I recover and get back to normal business? And that's the offsite backup. That's make sure I can reload that. I know when to shut down the problem that's happening. How do I recover and get back my information and still make sure I'm protecting my customers and my vendors and my employees? So that's really what it's all about. So again, just to leave you with this, again, there are mom and pop companies, there are 1 and 2 person operations, there are mega corporations. People are all subject to cyber problems, obviously. So look at your situation, look at the office size, the staffing, how many people are working for you right now, how many points of access. And again, so much of what I've talked about today, you can put these in so easily, and there's negligible cost to a lot of these things. It's about training and complex passwords and securing paperwork, things like that. So again, this is going to cost you a lot less than dealing with the problem after the fact. You're losing customer goodwill, you're losing a lot of trust, there were a lot of legal implications. So I stress to look at this all now and not wait until there's actually a problem. Now there's just a couple of helpful resources. Office of the State Controller, FTC, they've got a lot of great information there. A little bit about 2FA. And again, we can make this information available to you. And of course, on top there, BBB.org cybersecurity. We have a lot of good information we've compiled there. So again, feel free to ask any further questions. I know it's a lot of information. And if anyone wants to contact me after the fact, again, I'm happy to try and answer further questions. Over to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Brian. All this was great. I feel like I learned so much. I always learn something new from you.
Excellent, thank you.
We had quite a few questions come through. The first is, we use the online cloud version of QuickBooks for all of our customer, vendor, employees. Is this secure?
And again, while, and I certainly don't want to not give you a full answer to your question, in terms of recommending one product versus another product, the fact is, make sure you're looking at your, obviously that's a known brand, it's a known name, but I would just make sure that you're looking at your agreement with them and make sure that you're understanding what level of security they're using, what level of encryption you're using. The fact that it's in the cloud alone doesn't necessarily help you. Find out, look carefully at what you contracted for. What does your agreement say? And look very carefully at what level of security they're employing, specifically the encryption and the type of encryption. And I understand you're not going to be necessarily an expert in this, but I encourage you, call, email, ask them to explain to you how they're protecting this data, what they do. Are they responsible for patching and a patching schedule, for updates? Who's maintaining that? So if you don't understand what they're doing for you, I encourage you, again, because not everyone's agreement is going to be the same and not everyone has the same level of protection, reach out to them and ask them, what are the different ways that you are protecting my information? Look at what your agreement says, look at the level of encryption, and find out whether or not they're responsible for keeping all of it updated in terms of patches and keeping all the antivirus and anti-malware software updated. So I would ask those questions.
Great. The next question is, I'm using the confidential mode in Gmail to send a sensitive email, and it blocks the recipient from printing, forwarding, copying, downloading the email, but they can still screenshot it. Do you know if there's any way to block that function?
I wouldn't specifically know. I think it would be incredibly difficult to block someone to take a screenshot of anything, given the way that works. I mean, it's great that you're using that. It's certainly better than not using it. But again, I wouldn't be familiar with how someone could stop that particular aspect of the screenshot. That'd be hard for me to figure out how someone could do that. I'm not saying it isn't possible, but nothing comes to mind in terms of how you could block something like that. That would be a tough thing from my perspective. You could ask someone who knows more than I do, but that would surprise me.
Is there any way to block phishing text messages received on a business phone? And if they are viewed, can they get information on that device?
Wow, that's the $1,000,000 question. I would love to be able to have all these phishing ones blocked. That would be great. Unfortunately, the best thing you can do, and whether it's your phone or your tablet or whatever your device is if you have a good program in there, you can actually look for the continual, the addresses that come up that are associated with the spam, associated with phishing, and that can go on a certain list that's going to be blocked. So you can attempt to block a lot of those if you have high-level software that can deal with, it looks for the most common phishing and the addresses associated with that phishing and the spam, email, things like that. It can go onto a blacklist and it blocks those IP addresses and things like that from coming through. So you can block some of it if you have strong enough software and filters. And again, really good spam filters are going to help with that. But is there any way of blocking all of it? Unlikely. I mean, the fact is, unfortunately, some of it comes through, and the fact that it's business versus home, if only they would accept the fact that it's my business one, I shouldn't be spamming, but they don't know the difference. They don't care. Business, home, they're going to spam you anyway. But again, high-level spam filters are going to help deal with a lot of those. Putting them on these blacklists so that any of these that come up over and over again as being spam will be blocked. But yes, some will likely get through. Invariably, some will get through, unfortunately.
This one's a couple of questions in one. How do you encrypt emails, and can you encrypt all outgoing emails?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even if you have something like Outlook or some of the basic ones, it's fairly easy to set, on the tabs there, you can actually select that you want to encrypt something, but that's only half of it. Whoever is on the other side of it to receive that has to be able to decrypt it. So it's not just you doing it. So if you have two offices, so you can't just encrypt everything and send to someone who can't decrypt it because they won't be able to read it. They won't be able to get the email. So it has to work between both parties. So if you are encrypting something, and again, I can walk you through it, but it's actually fairly easy to select the encryption function, whether it's Outlook or one of the major ones there. But you have to be working with someone who on the other side of it, and say you have 3 offices, those other 2 offices then have on the other side can then decrypt that email. So when it arrives with them, they'll decrypt it and then they can read it. So it has to work on both ends, one to encrypt and one to decrypt. So it's a 2-parter for that, but it's not that difficult. And look at your software and look at your email. It actually will walk you through the encryption part, but the more difficult part is to make sure that you're working with someone who as a recipient, who can then decrypt that email. But that's easy enough to do when it's your own office and it's internal. That's the way you should be setting it up, so that whenever your offices talk to each other, by definition, one is encrypting and the other one is decrypting when it gets to its recipient.
All right, for the next one, again, we can't promote or endorse any sort of products, but someone asked if you know anything about YubiKey and similar products, if you have any idea, and if they're safe, secure, kind of similar to the other ones that we've already talked about.
Yeah, again, obviously we can't. I apologize that we can't promote one product over another, obviously, because we're neutral. But again, to me, as with that or any other product, you want to look at reputation, how long they've been doing this. Check out if there have been complaints about how their security practices, things like that. But understand with whom you're dealing. Review carefully their cyber policies, their security policies, their data protection policies. If they employ regular updates and patches, how they maintain their firewalls. And again, this should be in your